What do you get when you mix MTV, the internet, 9/11, and social media? That's right, modern U.S. history. Welcome back to the AP History Podcast. Today we are diving into Unit 9 of AP U.S. History, 1980 to the present. Whether you lived through this era or just heard your parents rant about it and how awesome it was, this episode is packed with what you need to know for the AP exam: politics, economics, culture, and conflict. Whether you are students preparing for the AP exam or teachers brushing up to help your students, thank you so much for listening, and I would love to hear from you. Comment on this episode if you're on Spotify or YouTube. Comment on one of my social media posts on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, or Facebook. And just say hi. Let me know that you're out there and getting value from the podcast. Or ask me a question. I promise that I'll respond. You can also send me an email at wendy@aphistoryhelp.com. But wait, before I ring the bell to start class, I'm hosting a 2-hour APUSH bootcamp on May 4th. Perfect timing, right? May the 4th be with you. Anyway, there's more details on my website, or fast track by going to bit.ly/APHH bootcamp. Just to break that down so you get all the capitals and stuff right, it's bit.ly, all lowercase, / capitals APHHB, those are all capital, and then bootcamp in lowercase. I'll put it in the show notes and probably above my head if you're watching on a video, so that you can get it right. Or you can go to my website and just navigate to, there's a little tab that says bootcamp. You can find it that way. So the link will be in the show notes on my screen. We'll be covering as much content and skills as we can possibly fit into 2 hours. It's a live online Zoom session with me and students from all over the country and maybe even the world. We'll see. Come in, students. Class is in session. Today we're going to be learning about Unit 9 of AP U.S. History. It is the oft poor ignored unit of the course, as many teachers don't find time to cover it and just tell students, go ahead and learn this one on your own. So welcome to all of you in that boat. I mean, it is just 4 to 6% of what's covered on the test, but we're not going to ignore it. The major topics are the rise of conservatism, the end of the Cold War, the changes in economies, migration and immigration, and other challenges of the 21st century like terrorism. As far as the exam goes, you might see some multiple choice questions, only the secondary short answer question, and maybe it might get incorporated into a DBQ. So let's get started. The election of 1980 marked a big shift. Ronald Reagan won by a landslide, largely due to the economic struggles during Jimmy Carter's presidency. This kicked off a new conservative era. What were Reagan's goals? Smaller government, deregulation, lower taxes, stronger military, and traditional family values. He did leave Medicare and Social Security alone, as he acknowledged the popularity of those programs among most Americans. His approach became known as Reaganomics. It cut taxes, especially for the wealthy, with the idea that the benefits would trickle down to everyone else. Spoiler alert, it worked for some, mostly the rich, but others, from the poor and middle class, felt left behind. The wealth gap widened, and critics argued that it favored the rich. The Economic Recovery Tax Act of 1981 was a major piece of legislation signed by President Reagan that cut individual income tax rates across the board, with the top marginal rate dropping from 70% to 50%. It also allowed for faster depreciation of business assets and expanded incentives for saving and investments. The goal was to stimulate economic growth through supply-side economics, encouraging people to work, invest, and spend. Critics argued it increased deficits and favored the wealthy, while supporters said it just jump-started a sluggish economy. Meanwhile, the moral majority and other evangelical groups pushed back against what they saw as a moral decline. Things like legalized abortion and the sexual revolution that were products of the social and cultural changes of the 60s and early 70s. This was founded by Jerry Falwell in 1979. He was a key player in the rise of religious conservatism. One concrete example of their influence was the campaign to elect Ronald Reagan in 1980. They mobilized millions of evangelical voters through churches, TV, and mail campaigns, helping shift the Republican Party toward more socially conservative policies. They also pushed school boards to ban sex education and evolution-based curricula and backed efforts like the proposed constitutional amendment to allow school prayer. And the first female was appointed to the Supreme Court, Sandra Day O'Connor. And the court shifted in its decisions from the more liberal Warren Court of the 50s and 60s to the more conservative-leaning Berger and Rehnquist courts starting in the 80s. Somewhat tied to this topic, I guess I'll mention that in 1998, I know I'm jumping way ahead, but in 1998, during his second term, Bill Clinton became just the second president to be impeached due to lying under oath in a federal grand jury investigation. Just like Andrew Johnson before him, like over 100 years before him, and Donald Trump after him, he was acquitted by the Senate and allowed to complete his term in office. The Cold War ended under Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush, but basically Reagan did all the hard work, and it just took a little while. And that the Soviet Union would finally fall during Bush's presidency. Reagan had spent a good deal of time with Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev. And starting in the later 80s, Gorbachev introduced reforms in the Soviet Union, Glasnost, which led to more openness by the government, and perestroika, basically economic restructuring. In a very immensely, greatly oversimplified outcome, the result was that Eastern Europe broke free. The Berlin Wall fell in East Germany in 1989, and the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. With the U.S. now the only world superpower, it led new global efforts. For example, in 1991, Saddam Hussein, the leader of Iraq, ordered his troops to invade Kuwait, a small country that bordered them. There were allegations of ethnic cleansing of the Kurds. The result was the Persian Gulf War, which saw the U.S. lead a coalition to successfully push Iraq out of Kuwait. It might be a little bit early here, but our fun fact fits here. So if you are able to stand up and stretch, take a couple of deep breaths. If not, just tense and release those muscles just a few times while you listen to this next segment. Did you know that Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev actually became friends? In fact, during their 1986 summit in Reykjavik, Iceland, they almost agreed to eliminate all nuclear weapons. I almost feel like I need to repeat that because it's so hard to believe. If you didn't hear it, or if it didn't sink in, hit that back button. Go back like 15, 20 seconds. While the deal did not go through, their talks helped pave the way for the INF Treaty in 1987, which was the first agreement to reduce, not just limit, nuclear arms. A Cold War thaw thanks to two political opposites who found common ground and a friendship. The U.S. economy changed fast in the late 20th century. Jobs moved overseas. It is now globalization, after all. Tech boomed with the advent of the internet and personal computers. And wages, well, they stagnated for some while Wall Street thrived. The North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, which was signed in 1994, created a free trade zone between the U.S., Mexico, and Canada. This was great for business, but controversial for American workers, as many American factories moved to Mexico to hire much cheaper Mexican laborers. This agreement was renegotiated during the first Trump presidency to include stricter labor rules, digital trade provisions, and updates for the auto industry. And it was renamed the USMCA, or United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement. So probably the important part to remember there is that it used to be NAFTA, now it's USMCA, if it still exists in this moment. Who knows? In the last 40 years or so, America became more diverse and divided. Immigration from Asia and Latin America has surged, and LGBTQ plus activism has grown. And partisan media and political polarization has, well, taken off. For example, in 2015, the Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage in the case called Obergefell versus Hodges. This was a major civil rights milestone. Another landmark was the 2008 election of Barack Obama, the first Black president. Now, everything changed on September 11th, 2001. The terrorist attacks on New York and Washington, D.C. killed nearly 3,000 people. The U.S. responded by invading Afghanistan in 2001. By the way, this was where Al-Qaeda was located. So the invasion was not to punish the country of Afghanistan per se, but to get to the terrorists. Also, the NATO allies of the United States honored their Article 5 promise as a member of NATO, as America was attacked here. And an attack on one is an attack on all. So the forces trying to root out Osama bin Laden and the terrorists were an international coalition. Now, this was the only time that Article 5 of NATO has kicked in since it was formed in 1949. Another result of the 9/11 attacks was the passing of the Patriot Act, which expanded surveillance and tightened airline security. The Department of Homeland Security was created to coordinate responses to terror threats, making it the most recently added cabinet department in the federal government. In 2003, the U.S. launched the Iraq War, claiming there were weapons of mass destruction. Now, the Iraq War became controversial when weapons of mass destruction were not found. Many years later, in 2011, during Obama's presidency, Osama bin Laden was killed by U.S. forces. So let's review the big ideas of Unit 9. Yeah, that's right. We're already at the end. First, a conservative movement gained momentum in the 1980s. The Cold War ended. Tech and globalization reshaped the economy. Social movements and immigration diversified America. And 9/11 reshaped U.S. foreign and domestic policy. Now, for continuity and change essays, trace how leaders like Reagan to Trump shaped U.S. values and policies. All right, so comment on this episode if you're on Spotify or YouTube. Comment on one of my social media posts on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, and just say hi. Let me know you're out there. Let me know that you're valuing something about this podcast. Tell your friends who are cramming for the exam to go listen to some of the past episodes. All the way back to the beginning of the school year, I cover every single unit of AP World History and AP US History. And be sure to join us for our last episode of the season. That's right, the pre-exam party episode. It's going to drop on May 5th, which is the day after the APUSH Bootcamp. The bootcamp session is May 4th at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. I welcome people from all time zones. You just have to adapt. And there are lots more details on my website. You can either go to bit.ly/APHH or go to aphistoryhelp.com and navigate to the bootcamp tab. The link is also in the show notes and above my head on my screen right now if you are watching the video version of this. And with that, we have covered it all, you guys, from Unit 1 and the pre-European America all the way to the global superpower America, from Unit 1 to Unit 9. Thanks so much for tuning in and listening with me. And with that, this episode of the AP History Help podcast is now history.